Hey, it's Jag, and today we continue with building stereo rigs.
Yeah.
In the last video, I demonstrated an old school mono rig with chorus and delay. Then I showed a old school version of a dry wet stereo rig, again using chorus and delay. And finally I did a setup of an old school stereo rig with delay and chorus. So today we're going to look at three of the more typical modern ways to set up a stereo rig. Those would be wet, dry, wet, dry, wet. We'll also use a software-based double tracking setup. So stick around. These are going to be interesting, very similar to the old school rigs, except we get some advantages being able to place our effects after the gain stages. Okay, so we played around with the old school rigs. I just had to take some time and kind of play around with that. That's really a place I like to live, probably because my formative years were spent playing with rigs like that. At any rate, we're in the modern era, the high-tech era of music production now, and guitar players, singers, everybody, every musician, producers, engineers, we have access to so much technology now, and so many awesome ways to make our sounds. So I'm going to go over basically three that I consider sort of the staple ways of getting a stereo rig. Or of setting up a stereo rig. The main difference is, as I've said before, is that we now can put our modulation and delay effects after the amp, or in an effects loop after the crunch gain stages, and get some more natural tone out of them. In the case of modulation, the modulation is a little crisper, has a little more edge to it, or a little more clarity. And with delays, they tail out more naturally. We can set a higher level of delay and have them tail out a little longer if we like. So the first one that I'm going to demonstrate here is the modern dry wet. So very similar to the old school dry wet, except the modulation and delay are after the amps, essentially. This would work the same in a 2-amp traditional setup if you put the delay and reverb in the effects sends and returns on a modern amp. Dry signal doesn't change much. It still sounds the same because it virtually is. But the benefits that we get are, like I say, in a modern system, chorus is a little more crisp, a little more articulate. So here's with a stereo chorus doing the same riff we've been doing. So you hear that sizzle. It's more there. It's a more present chorus. Sometimes that's not the greatest thing. I'm personally a fan of chorus in front of the amps. I like that softening. But where it really works well is with digital delays, and especially longer delays. So here's a delay, what have I got my time say? About a 280 millisecond delay, about 5 repeats. And the mix is boosted up a little higher on the delays, and you can hear that the delay doesn't get in the way as much as it would with this same setup in front of the amps. So it's like the delay stays out of your way. It's not a ducking delay. That's a whole other subject, but it's like the delay stays out of the way of the signal. And you can do the same trick. You turn the chorus on, chorus and delay. And again, this is a dry wet setup. So you hear all the effect coming from one side. In my phones, it's on the right side, but it's still a very broad stereo spectrum. It has a very arena-ish feel to it. So with the chorus and the delay on. So I really like that. The chorus isn't super apparent, but there's a real presence that it seems to have brought into the signal, and the delay just has things sort of trail off this way. Clean sounds work very well this way as well. I will put the compressor on again. Compressor just seems to make a clean sound kind of pop a little bit. It makes it more responsive, I guess. Here's the sound. I'll leave the delay and the chorus on. One of the things that I like about that is I can get the delay set up to a higher level. I can set it so that it has a relationship to the tempo I'm playing, and you can play on those repeats coming. As you could hear when I was doing that, you can really work with that, and it can really drive a tone. Here, I'll play that again. It's very similar to using a dotted eighth delay to the old country dotted eighth delay trick, or an example I really like is one of David Gilmour's solo tunes called Blue Light. Just a really cool effect, and it really comes alive with this. It's very rhythmic. Who else? The Edge. Does that all the time. I remember seeing U2 live and thinking, man, this guy's not playing near as much as I thought he was. I hadn't really realized how much he utilized delays to get his sounds. You know, and just you can rely on those repeats coming back to fill space for you. It lets you be more rhythmic and more solid. So that's the dry wet rig. It's not really my favorite. I like things that go kind of, my OCD kind of wants things to be even on each side. So this is a nice sound. I'm learning to accept that everything isn't perfectly symmetrical. So good practice for me to play with this. Forgot what I was going to say about that. The thing that works really well about a dry wet rig like this is if you have two guitar players in the band, or a guitar player and a keyboard player who feature very well. You can have the guitar player, and maybe he's over here, and his dry or his wet effects can maybe go toward that side, and the keyboard player or other guitar player can go that way. So in the field, the stereo field, you're sort of implying where the guitar players would be standing on the stage, or the guitar player and keyboard player would be on the stage, and you're still getting that broad spectrum, stereo spectrum. In some ways it's bigger because this guy's sound is delaying at the same time this guy's sound is delaying, but they're in two different ears, and it just makes things sound bigger and broader and leaves more room in the center for the things that typically go in there, like the kick drum, bass, and vocalist. So that's the dry wet rig. This next one is probably it's very popular. It's also probably one of the most expensive ways to develop a stereo guitar signal chain, and that's the wet dry wet rig. So looking here on Amplitude, I've set up a wet dry wet rig. So we're going through our mono pedals, our compressor, our overdrive, and our gate, and then we're splitting three ways into 3 amps. So in this case, I'm using 3 JCM models, 2 exactly same non-reverb models on the left and right, and then I've got one of the reverb models in the middle. I'm not using the reverb on that. I chose that amp model just because it has a slightly different sound. The outside JCMs are set exactly the same. They're just panned left and right. And I just wanted a slightly different tone up the middle. The other thing I did, as I said, this can get to be the expensive way to do things. Normally in a wet, dry, wet rig, you would have your center, your dry amp, going out dry as it is here. And then your left and right would take stereo left and right inputs from a single stereo unit delay or chorus or multi-effects usually. What I've done here is even doubled that. And I have it going into an independent delay and modulation effect on the left and right, similar to what I said the Adrian Belew true stereo setup is. And again, that's just so that we can get things working differently on each side. A lot of the multi-effects nowadays can do this right in the box. It just was fun for me to set it up like this. What I've got set up, well, first of all, here's the dry sound. So again, I have the compressor turned off now. I don't have need for that with this many amps and that much gain going on both of them. It's there for clean sounds now. Here's the dry signal. And one of the things you can hear is, compared to the dry wet rig, and especially the old school dry wet rig, you don't perceive it so much as a stereo signal, even though it is, all the amps are mono. And that's because I have the JCM 800 going up the middle, and then I have 2 JCM 800s on the left and right. So essentially we've just got one big mono signal. Where that really opens up, though, is when you start putting your effects on the left and right. On the one side, I have a digital chorus and a digital delay, and I have exactly the same digital chorus and digital delay on the other side. The difference is, if you look at the chorus here, the settings are virtually the same, except, and I mean from left to right side, except that my rate on the chorus here is 333 hertz, and on the other side, it's 666. It's 0.666. Sorry. I just kind of got lost in number of the beast here. So yeah, we'll go over that again. So over on this side, I've got my rate at 333 milliseconds or 0.333 hertz. And on the other side, I've got double that. So I've got it set to 0.666 hertz or 666 milliseconds. Depth is the same for both of them. For the chorus, because this is a left and right side, the mix is all the way wet, so none of the dry signal is coming through on those left or right amps, and then the dry signal, like I say, is up the middle. For the delay, similar kind of thing. What I did was I took my doubling delay setup and I shortened it a bit, and the mix is not quite as drastic. I still find with delays I like to have some of the dry signal come through, even in a wet, dry, wet setup like this. So the mix is down at about 21%, and that would be the same on both of these sides, 21%. But what I do have different, I've got no feedback. Like I said, I set this up as a doubling delay. On this side, I've got it to 40 milliseconds. So a little bit more than the 30 milliseconds I used in the previous example of the old school stereo. But the reason that's at 40 is on this side, we've got the delay down at 20 milliseconds. For some reason, with the old school stereo setup, 30 milliseconds worked out nicely. And what that meant was one delay was 30 millisecond on one side and the other was 60 millisecond. I tried to mirror that here and I didn't like the sound of it as much. It sounded better with a 20 millisecond and a 40 millisecond. So that's how I've got that set. Let's listen to what the chorus sounds like on these first. So I'll turn them on both sides, the left and right, and you'll hear the depth here. So you can definitely hear a difference in the tone and the depth of the stereo field and the broadness of it. The other benefit we have doing it this way is I can turn off the chorus on the one side and get a little more subtle dry wet. So you get more options with this setup in terms of how you're going to set it up and run it. And you can really do things like setting the times. So mine, in my case, I've set the times so they're multiples of each other. But you could set them so they're different subdivisions of a beat. Particularly with delays, that works really nice, or just so they have no relation to each other. One thing about a wet, dry, wet is I find that the effect doesn't stomp on you. It's not overbearing. It's there, but it's subtle. So that's with the chorus on there. We'll do like we've been doing, and I will turn the delay on each channel. You'll see how this again has that that faux double track kind of sound. So very subtle, not, again, it's one of the things I like about this kind of a setup, is it is very subtle. If you wanted a little more, you could take your mix up even to full wet on each side here. Now you'll hear this, it'll be very obvious. Now you're hearing some phasing artifacts there too. We'll talk about that a little later when we talk about the pluses and minuses and why I initially said why you shouldn't build a stereo rig. But for now, we'll leave this here. So that's the delay panned full wet left and right, and then the tone coming up the center. By rights, I should probably boost the output a little bit too. This video is getting a little long, so I'll kind of leave it there. I just will show you this with the chorus on both sides as well. So just a little more broadness to it. One of the things that I find with that is the guitar doesn't seem like it's in the center at all with those delays panned left and hard right. Again, the psychoacoustics, there is one amp that is going up center, but the way the delays work together, the psychoacoustics works together, and I don't purport to know a whole lot about that, but they are effectively, it feels like it's removing that guitar from the center. It really sounds like the guitar is on the left and right. But it still has the character that middle amp adds into it. So clean. How well does this work out clean? Normally for clean, I like to have longer delays, not like a doubling delay like that. So let's just hear how this sounds without changing anything. Actually, it sounds pretty full. There's nothing coming at you after. But this is a nice, pretty broad sound for clean signals. So I'm curious. I want to see what happens if I bring these delays kind of back more to the settings that I kind of like for a clean signal. So we'll go 333 milliseconds there, and we'll go with the 666 milliseconds on the other side and see what it gives us. Probably we're set right now for single repeat, and it's full wet on each side. So right away you can hear that the mix has really brought up those delays more than the center channel. So I'm going to take this mix back to about 50% to bring a little bit more of the dry signal to the front. I could turn up the dry amp as well, but this has a broader effect to that, or a more full spectrum effect. I don't know how to describe it. I like the way it sounds better. May take the mix down a little bit lower, but let's see. Yeah. So, again, you can get lost in that. Very rhythmic, having those delays relate to each other. I'm going to take the mix back to about 33%. I'm finding the delays are still up a little too much on each side here. 33 ought to kind of still give me that effect without being so obvious. And it's a single repeat. So, you know, very Brian May-ish, right? Which is another thing you can do. You can really use these as obvious effects. But bring this back to a clean sound. And again, single repeat. You could set more repeats. I'm not going to do that right now. Let's see what it sounds like with the chorus off. So more immediate. Without that chorus moving the guitar back and forth, the center guitar is very much right there, and the delays are a little subtle on each side. So this would be a good way, I think, to an example of a song like this. You would maybe start the intro like that. It might just be you and the vocalist, and then you might bring the choruses in when the chorus comes, or on the second verse, and give some of that movement when there are drums and bass as well. It would just help the guitar pop out more. So that's the wet dry wet modern rig, modern setup. Again, like I said, it's if you're doing it with real gear, not virtual gear, it's the expensive way to do it. What are we looking at? We're looking at a compressor pedal, an overdrive pedal, and a gate. Those aren't too bad. But then we're looking at 3 amps, and you might want to go even further and use different boutique amps, amps with complete different character. I used amps that were very similar sounding, and deliberately. And then if you're doing this in with a in the room kind of setup, you've got 3, 4, 12 cabinets as well, and then you've got your delay units. Like I say, a lot of the multi-effects now and multi-rack effects can do this right in one box. But if I were building something like this with physical gear, I probably would have at least 2 processors on the outputs. So that's the wet dry wet setup. I'm showing a little love to the Hiwatt today. So I've got the Hiwatt fired up through my Two Notes Captor X. You'll see it on the screen here. Just so you know what I've got set for the Hiwatt. My typical setup, starts with everything up at noon, and I go with the master full. And then I dial in the normal and bright to where they have the kind of crunch that I want, and then I fine tune with the EQ. So what I have set on the Hiwatt right now, the master is full up. So if I were going into a real cabinet, I could not sit in this room with it. The normal volume is at about 1 o'clock, and the bright volume is full as well. I've got the bass at about 8:30. Treble is at about 3 o'clock, so 8:30 o'clock, 3 o'clock. The middle and presence are both at noon, straight up. Also, in front of the amp, I've got what I call my old school pedal board. So it's just a little pedal board I put up in front. Right now it's got a vintage Ibanez Supertube STL from about 1984. And then I've got a TC Thunderstorm flanger working more as a chorus, and a TC Prophet delay. And those are all going into the front of the amp. So that's my old school rig. I don't right now have the delay or the flanger turned on. I do have the STL, the Supertube, turned on. The drive is set very, very low, just cracked open, and I've got the volume at about maybe 132 o'clock, just goosing the front of the amp a little bit. So here's what I've got set up on my Captor X. As you can see, we're coming in. I'm actually using one of the stock cabinets, the Uber 75. Basically what I do is sort of just come in and I do have some presets I really like, but I kind of will get things dialed to where I like them, and then I'll start changing cabinets and just go with whichever one gives me the sound I like. And today when I was setting this up, the Uber 75 Dyne R from Two Notes was really doing it for me. So as far as the setup in the Captor X itself, I've got the EQ section turned off. I've got the enhancer on. I don't use it a lot. It's a little bit less than 50-50 dry-wet. And what I like about it is just adding that little bit of body and thickness to it, and a little sparkle with the brilliance. I really like the reverbs, particularly in the Captor X. I don't know if it's the same algorithm in the Cab M, but in the Captor X, I can't get away from this particular setting that I've got here, the Cathedral reverb. I've got the gate set up again just to cut some of the noise. If I take the gate out, that's the level of noise I'm getting. So that's not noisy enough that I would actually have that gate turned on when I was gigging or recording. Like I say, I know gates now, they close a little more naturally, but I always find I know when I have a gate turned on. But I've got it on just so we don't have to listen to hiss in the background right now. You can see my mic choices, very, very straightforward. I've got a 201 condenser and a 421 dynamic. They're both set right at 0 for the level. I've got the, oddly enough, this isn't the way I often do it, but I've got the condenser right up against the cabinet, and I've got the 421 back a little bit. That's kind of backwards from the way you normally do it. It just, again, sounded good to me this way. Both of those are about halfway off axis. They're pointed straight in, but if the cone were here and the outer edge were here, they're right about there. The left and right output, it looks like I got the output boosted about 3 dB. I just set that to get my interface into the range that I wanted for input. And the twin tracker is off right now, but I will be turning it on. That's the purpose of this demo. And the voicing and space controls are turned off. Here's the basic sound. Again, just the Supertube is on, going into the Hiwatt. So, completely different animal than Amplitube and modeled amps. It's a real amp. I can really tell the feel of a tube amp. I don't have problems with the recorded sounds of modelers. The tones are great. But one other thing I said, what I miss about not using a cab is not having my pants flapping in the wind. The thing I miss when I don't use a real amp is just that feel that an amp has. I'd like to try and quantify that in some way. Maybe I'll figure it out and do a video. But it's true, there's a feel to a tube amp. It goes beyond tone now. Originally, the modelers didn't approach the tone that a tube amp could do. I don't think you can say that anymore. But there is a feel to a tube amp. So at any rate, that's the bass tone. So one of the most cost-effective ways, I guess, to get a good stereo sound, and if you've only got limited resources, would be to do something like this. Get a Captor X. I know they're not cheap, but they're not as expensive as some other options. And there's some processing in there. And if you already have a really great sounding amp, you can go into this. And the thing it gives you is the twin tracker. So I'll turn that on, and right away you'll hear the broadness. So with that little bit of reverb on there and the tail out, it's a very big, broad sound. So you can kind of get a lot of bang for your buck going for something like this. If your budget doesn't go that far, and you have some other way that you're recording direct or out to 2 amps, you could use something like the mimic pedal, or again, you know, some of the things we showed before, using a doubling delay or that kind of thing. But the twin trackers are kind of really cool, and I hadn't played with it much, so I wanted to do that, to use this as a demonstration. So in terms of clean tones, I'll leave the twin tracker on. I'm going to turn off the Super Tube and turn on just the Thunderstorm flanger. I like the Thunderstorm. The TC Thunderstorm is a budget pedal, really, from TC, but when you set it up right, it has a sound very much like an Electric Mistress, the Electro Harmonics pedal, very popular. Alex Lifeson used it for a lot of years. And that's kind of how I use it. I use it more as a chorus than a flanger. So I'm just going to turn off the Super Tube and turn on the flanger. I'm going to leave the delay off, though. My clean sound I get from just turning the volume down on the guitar. I'm going to turn the gate off just so that doesn't get in our way. That's the level of noise you get without the Super Tube. So, again, clean tone. So, you know, real amp, it's a little crunchier. I got to take the volume back a little farther if I don't want crunch on my clean tone. And don't bump the volume and turn it up again. But nice clean tone. And that's with the twin tracker on. I'm going to turn the twin tracker off, and we'll just do some chords. Twin tracker off. I've still got the flanger on. And the twin tracker, it just, again, gives you that broadness. Well, that's it for part 2 of this stereo rig series. Today we built a modern dry-wet rig, a modern wet-dry-wet rig, and we demonstrated software-based multi-tracker. In the next video, I'll discuss some of the pluses and minuses of using a stereo rig in the studio live and rehearsing. And we'll discuss why you may or may not want to go with this stereo rig. So until then, like and subscribe. Thanks for watching. Check out my band One Soul Thrust. As always, the links are down below. Have a great day.